tell me what people need to know about what really happened now in the 6th month of Republican efforts to have us not know the truth.
Well, during that day, it was not peaceful there. It wasn't like a tour, like some people make it seems to be. Had we not stopped some of these people, there were going to be people killed that day, because that's what most people were saying that they were going to do, and we stopped them. We stopped them, even though the president at that time, he left us on our own as a sacrificial part of what we were doing there. It felt like we didn't have the support from the president at that time, even though he was watching everything on TV, and the security situation was degrading. We felt abandoned by him. He didn't fulfill his oath of office. And I'm still recovering from those hugs and kisses, like he claimed that it was happening that day. And for those of members of Congress who are not, that continue to propagate that lie that it was peaceful, that the person that died, that got shot at the Capitol, was executed. So if we had let those people go through and not secure their safety, would he be calling them or calling the Ash Valley a murder? A murder? Like it doesn't make no sense. So what would it have taken for them to disavow this indefensible act? Would it be one of or more members of Congress or senators or the vice president that they had died? Then what would it be called? A terrorist act or a tour? Because again, most of those people that were there, they were telling us, they told me what their intentions were, and that's why we held out the line at the lower stairs entrance that day in the tunnel.
Sergeant Gonell, what do the Republican lawmakers say to you or your colleagues when they see you face to face about the turn that this has taken?
I had not met any of them yet. I spoke out almost about a month ago when right after they voted against the independent committee to find out, at least find out or begin the process, try to find out what happened and what led to this riot, whatnot, insurrection. But I had not spoken to any from the other side, maybe because I don't fit the narrative that this was peaceful, maybe because they don't care, or maybe because they are complicit themselves in terms of trying to cover. Because to me, it seems like they are covering for what happened. They don't want to know what happened. They don't want to deal with it. They're just pretending that it will go away. And we feel that betrayal. We feel that not the lack of support from them, even though they are claimed to be the party of law and order, the party of fiscal responsibility. When they had a chance to actually do something about finding out what transpired and who did what, when you had the president himself just watching TV, and 3 hours later or 4 hours later, then all he does is put a statement on Twitter or on the video. It's un-American, because if we had not done what we did with the help of some of the other agencies like MPD and all the area law enforcement agencies, whatnot, a lot of people would have died, either members of Congress, ourselves, and also some of these rioters. And for some people, January 6th just happened one day. For me, for those responding officer, it's nonstop, because we still had to get phone calls from the Department of Justice, from the FBI. Do you know this person? Can you identify this officer, your coworker? was this one of the individual that assaulted you that day? So it's nonstop. And for people to try to move on from this day, some of them they already have from the other politically they had. But for us, the people who suffer, I'm still recovering. Today I just had physical therapy from those injuries still, almost 6 months later. And it's undefensible what they're doing and betraying their oath of office. I'm sorry. It just seems like we are living in another country, not the United States of America, as I hold this country very dear to me.
I'm just listening to you, and I'm so sorry that you've been let down. You have been let down. I have interviewed a lot of lawmakers who told me accounts of telling their spouses where their wills were the night before, or wearing sneakers, or sending their staff and family home. What were you expecting the day before, January 5th, or the morning of January 6th? What did you think was possible that day? Did you feel blindsided by the size of the crowd and the violence of the crowd and their determination to take the Capitol?
Well, that day before, I was kind of like at ease. I didn't think much of it in terms of like what will happen. And we knew that there were reports on social media, whatnot, of people gathering more than usual, and also reports of people bringing weapons to the Capitol. But we didn't know who those people were. So when we are fighting those people on the lower stairs area, we didn't know who had weapons, why not. We tried to arrest some of the people at the beginning, but unfortunately we couldn't because we continued to get overwhelmed, and we were not going to use those resources to be tied up to make an arrest when we had to defend the whole complex, why not. I'm sorry, what was the other question?
One of the things that a select committee could arguably get to the bottom of is what was known ahead of time. And you described yourselves as feeling sacrifice to the mob and their violence. I mean, it seems that understanding who knew what ahead of time would be an important piece of making sure this never happens again. And I'm just curious what your sense was of what the 6th was going to be like ahead of time.
We knew it was going to be a long day. I mean, I worked civil disturbance unit for a while now, and this was not going to be the first time that I was activated, whatnot. But given the reports that some of the rioters may turn against us, we did what we were trained to. We stopped them. We held our own. We know, as far as I know, none of the members of Congress or senators or staff were injured. Sadly, we made the ultimate sacrifice, the Capitol Police officers and whatnot. And again, I find the obstructions to at least have investigate this as a desecration of the Signy sacrifice, because that's what led me to come forward and speak about this, because when I saw the vote that day and the one side voting against one, that put me in that situation when I saw the news and I literally saw my family in Signy's family's place when they were talking on TV, getting some promise from some of the Congress representatives and whatnot. And I literally saw myself, my family in that situation, because that could have been myself paying the ultimate sacrifice. And yes, I did sign up for it, but it doesn't make sense that you don't want to at least try to find out on how to prevent this in the future. And I will do my job, what is required of me doing every single time, no matter what, because I know That's why I signed up for, and I like my job. But I shouldn't have to take any extra risk for something that is preventable, and for them not to try to at least find out what's happened and investigate this. It should be investigated, because we have people that are complicit, I think, and maybe perhaps that's why they don't want to investigate it, because then themselves could be implicit.